Good evening. It's 7 o'clock Eastern Time. My name is John Bell. I'm the director of the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry. And I'm here to introduce our moderator and panelists for this evening's Fall Puppet Forum, whose title is The Challenging Concept, Exhibiting Racism. And this forum will be moderated Exhibiting Racism in Museums. That's the full title of our event this evening. Moderated by Dr. Jungmin Song, curator of our current exhibition, Puppetry's Racial Reckoning. And the other panelists will be Dr. Schroeder Cherry and Dr. William Condee, who Min will introduce in a minute. I wanted to mention that Puppetry's Racial Reckoning, which Min curated, is up in our museum, currently on display through the end of the month of October. So if you're in the northeastern United States and would like to see a fascinating example of the ways that puppetry as an art form has dealt with challenging questions of race and racism and representation and ethnicity, please come and see that exhibit. The next exhibition after that is going to be Hecho en Puerto Rico, Made in Puerto Rico, an exhibition of Puerto Rican puppetry curated by Dr. Manuel Moran and Deborah Hunt. So two exhibitions that you're not going to see anywhere else. So it's worth coming to Connecticut just to see these exhibits at the Ballard Institute in Storrs, Connecticut. We're part of the University of Connecticut, and very proud to be that. I wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events, which include our Puppet Slam, our Fall Puppet Slam on Friday, October 22nd at 8 p.m. I'm thinking my colleague, Emily Wicks, might be entering some links to information about that. Friday, October 22nd at 8 p.m. It's going to be super interesting because it's online. We have international performers from across the United States and different continents. I'm sure we're going to post detailed information about each show. Work by UConn Puppet Arts students, this amazing group of talented young puppeteers. Also on Saturday, October 30th at 11 a.m., our puppet performance series will continue with John McDonough of Pumpernickel Puppets from Worcester, Mass. He will be performing Bugsy and Friends. This will be an outdoor performance in Betsy Patterson Square, which is right outside our front door. It's a little town square in quaint Storrs, Connecticut. So come check that out. And then our next puppet forum on November 4th, Thursday, November 4th, also at 7 p.m., also online, will be the Doll Plays Reunion, which Min, I believe, is going to host also. And that'll be an interesting discussion with playwright and writer Alva Rogers, puppeteer Heather Henson, and puppeteer Holly Laws about a show they did in Providence, Rhode Island with the artist Kara Walker, a puppet show about an amazing woman, actual real life woman, a real woman from Harlem who had a doll collection. So that'll be a very interesting event as well. So of course, we have other events going on despite COVID. We're making things happen in person and online. So please feel free to connect with us. We have an email message that goes out every so often. So please stay in touch. We have the Facebook and Instagram. We're gramming. Emily and Wicks and I are making a series of TikTok videos that involve complicated dance moves. Just kidding about that. I'd like to introduce the host for this evening, the moderator for this evening, my colleague, Dr. Jungmin Song, the curator of Puppetry's Racial Reckoning. She's an adjunct faculty member here at UConn in the Theater Studies program at the Department of Dramatic Arts. Her writings have appeared in Performance Research, Art Press 2, Asian Theater Journal, and Contemporary Theater Review. In 2017, she edited a special issue of the British journal Puppet Notebook on Shakespeare and puppets, and did research, was a researcher in residence at the Institut International de la Marionnette in Charleville-Mézières, France, also about Shakespeare and puppetry. She curated the Shakespeare and Puppetry exhibition at the Ballard Institute in last year in 2020. And as a puppet maker, she's participated in numerous projects, including with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the famed Little Angel Theatre in London. She worked on the production of Venus and Adonis, co-production of Shakespeare Company and Little Angel Theatre. So with no further ado, welcome, Min. Thank you for being here.
I just realized that I need to upgrade my bio. Yes, okay. This year I become assistant professor in residence from adjunct. So I'm currently a faculty member of dramatic art as an assistant professor in residence. So today's forum was kind of planned to, the planning of this forum kind of emerged from our kind of frustration and difficulty, or like in discussions we had while we were creating the exhibition as a team in Ballard. So there's because the topic itself was very challenging, and we as we go along, Professor William Condee, when I heard the Professor William Condee's presentation in the symposium we hosted in April, that about the German the thinking process, it was in the situation in Germany, with the puppets represent foreigners and Africans and then Middle Eastern, and then also I kind of realized that, oh yes, this is the kind of questions we not just us have, is the questions a lot of other institutions in Europe also share. And then also, after we opened the exhibition, we realized that we need to present this exhibition in more productive way and a more meaningful way to our viewers. And then so we contacted Dr. Schroeder Cherry to consult about how we kind of manage tours, and then how we how we discuss this issues around racism. So that it would be great to have these two scholars in one place and then talk together about the topic. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce, just in case, I think there are probably in our audience that who hasn't actually seen our exhibition, that I'd like to introduce our exhibition to the audience, and then we can kind of start from there, and then kind of thoughts and then consideration we had as we are going through. And Emily, could you stop my PowerPoint? So, oh, I think this is Schroeder's one, I think. Oh. Yeah. Oh. So as we are waiting for my PowerPoint, so puppetry, the representation is in the core of puppetry. That puppet, not all puppets, but the one who creates puppet always creates somebody who is not always, but somebody who is not me. So it can be it is separate from this another, and then it is also very convenient in a form that you can actually have create to somebody that is not that's the other. So it is in that form you see the other, it's and then in that process we see caricatures and then stereotypes coming in. So I think, and then so this puppet, this is exhibition kind of studies the puppets in our collection, and then see how this stereotyping slip into the in the artistry of puppets. So we have one thing we try to do is critically engage with the representation of minorities and then other culture in puppets, and then that is in a way the self-critique. Also, so in next slide, that yes. So one thing we as many of you, some of you probably know that Ballard Institute began to kind of preserve the Frank Ballard, who's the founder of a puppet arts program in University of Connecticut, and then that's where our name comes from. That and then we also we also looked at Frank Ballard's productions. And so we have 2 productions by Frank Ballard featured in our exhibition. One of them is the Mikado. Mikado is the late 19th century Orientalist opera by Gilbert and Sullivan that's set in Japan. So Frank Ballard, this was the first production he created for the Jorgensen Theater after he launched the puppet art program. And then this was so this like a lot of Mikado, the Mikado being very popular opera, that there was just countless productions. But like a lot of them, his production set like Japan as this cherry blossom land, exotic land of cherry blossom. But there was also interesting. If we look at closely at the characterization of his character, can we go to next slide? That his characterization is hugely influenced by the Asian supervillain characters that were just so really prevalent in the popular culture in 1960s. Most notably, Fu Manchu is a film that with what is known as Fu Manchu mustache and the long fingernails. That this is super villain characters. There was also Christopher Lee with he painted his face with the yellow. And this is Asian stereotype at that time as one of the Asian stereotype of 1960s, the mid 20th century. And then can we go to next slide? And then also we see the characterization of the kind of similar characterization of that was circulated during the Second World War. That the one you see at the left, far left, Tokyo Kid, there's a anti-Japanese propaganda poster circulated while U.S. was in the war against Japan. And then the one in the middle is we have exhibit in the exhibit, the object we have exhibit that is a puppet head modeled in similar way character, and then that was circulated during propaganda images. And then we see similar feature of the characters in Frank Ballard's characterization. And so one thing we try to do here is not that we kind of accuse or blame each artist featured in this exhibition that they are racist. No, that's not what we are trying to do. What we are trying to do here is that we show this in their historical context, and then how this image is being circulated through popular culture, including puppetry, and then perpetuated through those media. That's what we were trying to say. This say in this exhibition. And then can we go to next slide? And then we also juxtapose these images with the contemporary artist work that kind of critique these kind of stereotypes. So we have Kimi Maeda's work that is about her father's experience at the Japanese American incarceration camp during the Second World War, that she shows the images of her father being boy, being just her image of a father overlaps with the propaganda images. And the next slide. Also, the other thing we did was that looking back did more careful research on the puppets we have. So we found that this set of puppet that had been exhibited as the Mikado by Tony Sarg, and then that's wrong. Is the Chinese characters that cannot be Mikado. Mikado is Japanese, set in Japan. And the next one. Next one, Anu. And then this identification of puppet actually has a kind of interesting relationship with like cultural and racial biases. And then that is kind of explained in identification section. And next slide. And then we also looked at the Turkish, this set of, this is not a set, but these Karagos figures that is from Turkey. Then we learned that what we knew as English woman was actually Turkish woman. And then young man was actually a woman. And then Chinese diplomat actually was Chinese acrobat. It's what we have the biases or preconception we have about group of people can be applied when we identify puppets. And then we through the research and the consultation with Turkish scholars scholars of Karagos, we were able to correct all this misidentification. The next slide. And then also I did an extensive discussion with the historians of Iran. So then this is a Mubarak character who has been kind of just probably displayed as a trickster character. And then we also found it's also like American minstrel blackface puppets. It has actually originated from a blackface performance in Iran. That was one thing we actually, it was a part of preparing for this exhibition, this research process to kind of gave the cultural context of these puppets were part of the important project process of the curation of this exhibition. Next slide. And then we have a minstrelsy and its legacy section that we have puppets that has influence from minstrelsy, the blackface performance that was most popular entertainment in the 19th century in the US, and then that has a global impact. And then next slide. And then also we do the same with the kind of same logic that we have a minstrel puppet, those we did the juxtaposing the anti-Japanese propaganda, anti-Japanese figure And with the Kimi Maeda's work, we have jigsaws which has a representation of minstrel figure, minstrel characters. We juxtapose that with the Garland Fowell's work, that is Jigman Jig 1 and 2, that is kind of his critique on minstrelsy, minstrel representation in jigsaws. And next slide, I think. And then also we also can try to kind of talk, it's not about, it cannot be just clear cut between this is racist and then this is not. So we have Punch and Judy set that include only Mickey Mouse puppets that's based on only Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse figure in animation, that minstrel actually influenced the early animation in the United States, and then also it influenced the puppetry. And then this is still kind of living in the way we live now, and influence the way we think about the race. I think that's what I have here. Yeah. So this is a kind of a just snap view, like glimpse of what we have in our exhibition. And then before this this forum started, actually Schroeder asked me like how many puppets in the exhibition. Then I said we don't know how many. And then I hope you to come and see the exhibition, or hopefully we can launch our online catalog like later this year. And then now I will introduce Dr. William Condee and then Dr. Schroeder Cherry. So I think I'm waiting for yes. Thank you very much for joining us. So Dr. William Condee is J. Richard Hamilton Professor Emeritus of Humanities in Ohio University, is the author of, I just realized that I need my glasses. author of Cool and Culture, the Opera House in Appalachia, yes. And Theatrical Space, a guide for directors and designers. His articles on Southeast Asian puppetry have been published in Puppetry International, Studies in Theater and Performance in Asian Theater and Performance and Asian Journal of University Education. Articles on other subjects have appeared in Theater Survey, Theater Topics, and Theater Annual. He has co-authored work with Thomas Ilmer, yes, yeah. on German theater in a history of German on German theater in a history of German theater in Cambridge University Press and Theater Journal. His most recent work on non-material performance and has appeared in Imagined Theaters and TDR, the drama review, co-authored by Barry Roundtree. Condee was the Koel Miura visiting professor at Chubu, Japan, Fulbright Senior Specialist listed University of Leipzig. Is it right? Is it?
Yeah, Leipzig.
Yeah, Leipzig. And University of Malaya, and has lectured at universities including East China Normal, Tsinghua, and Nanjing, Dangu, and Hindu Dharma Institute in Bali. And Dr. Schroeder Cherry is originally from Washington, D.C., is now Maryland-based artist, and 2019 Sondheim competition finalist who captures everyday scenes of African diasporan life. He earned a bachelor degree in painting and puppetry from the University of Michigan, a master's degree in museum education and George Washington University, and doctorate in museum education from Columbia University. His works are found in private and public collections across the US. In 2020, he was awarded the Municipal Art Society of Baltimore City Artist Travel Prize for research in Bahia, Brazil. In 2021, he received an Individual Artist Award from Maryland State Art Council. Cherry's museum career spans more than 30 years with positions held at the Smithsonian Anacostia Museum in Washington, D.C., Studio Museum in Harlem, J. Paul Getty Museum in Malibu, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and Maryland Historical Society. He served 8 years at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, first as Deputy Director for Museums and later as Counselor to the Director. He was recently appointed Curator at James E. Lewis Museum, Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Then we will hear from Professor Condee first about his research in Germany, and then Dr. Schroeder Cherry will, I think he will talk about our exhibit, if I'm right? Yes, I'm looking forward to hear about it. So Bill, could you take it away? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Min, and it's an honor to be here and an honor to be sharing the screen with Dr. Schroeder Cherry. It's a great honor. So my work began with a seemingly simple question. Why are there so many blackface puppets in Germany? The answer, of course, is very complex. I want to start off first by acknowledging my position in regard to this work. I cannot speak for the puppeteers, and I certainly cannot speak for those who have been harmed by these puppets. And I want to thank the people at the puppet collections and acknowledge their thoughtful approaches to these issues and the fact that they brought these problematic puppets to my attention. So in 2019, I conducted research at 5 major collections in Bad Kreuznach, Berlin, Dresden, Lübeck, and Munich. All of these museums have extensive holdings of blackface puppets built on racist stereotypes. And these puppets are a problem for the museums and for visitors. If nothing else, they perpetuate racist stereotypes. So the first problem with exhibiting these puppets is what to call them. Many from the 19th century and the early 20th centuries use German racial slurs. And everyone at the museums agreed in conversations with me that these words are racist, but what to do about them is much more complex. An example of how this can veer off course, at the Kolk 17 Museum in Lübeck, a well-intentioned former staffer was shocked to see a racial slur in the database identifying some of these puppets. And so this person's substitution for this racial slur was to use the word African. Well, they did recognize there was a problem and they tried to devise a solution. But obviously these puppets are not from Africa and do not depict Africans. Another problem is that the slur may be inaccurate as an original name. I saw many puppets in storage at the Munich Puppet Museum, and many of them were similar or even seemingly identical, but had different names. The reason I found out was that different people over the course of time had applied the labels with what might or might not be the original name. And we've just heard about some of these problems at the Ballard with the identification of puppets. The curators in Munich were emphatic about this. They said if the original name is unknown, they had no obligation to use that racial slur. So the issue of naming is ongoing and active. No one defended the use of the racial slur without context or explanation, but some felt it could be explained or contextualized. For instance, in Dresden, Lars Rebane said that he would use those words. He said, when it is the historical name of the puppet. He argued that it's only a description, and he was concerned with issues that he referred to as political correctness. Others felt the term should be avoided completely. In Bad Kreuznach, they avoid labels and names at all for that section of the exhibit. They just say puppets from everywhere. Masha Erbelding in Munich said that she felt she wanted to reframe the issue. She said, we have an obligation not to use those racial slurs. In Berlin, Uwe Framenau was most emphatic. He said there is no argument to use those racial slurs. He said you don't do it even in a program or, excuse me, or in a historical context or in quotation marks. He said some things have to die out. Beyond the name, the question is, should these puppets be exhibited at all? And how should they be exhibited if they're going to be exhibited? The curators I spoke to felt that these puppets should be shown because they are part of German history. As Erbelding said to me, if they were excluded entirely, then you'd only have white puppets, and that can't be the answer. I identified 4 themes in examining these puppets: the imagined Turk, the imagined African, the imagined African American, and the imagined multicultural German. And this is obvious, but it needs to be stated, of course. To take the first example, they are not made by Turkish people and they do not depict Turkish people, hence my use of the word imagined. If we can have the first slide, please. So puppets, puppets of the imagined Turk are black-faced puppets from the 17th and 18th centuries, and they're conflated with a racial slur from people from many places along the Mediterranean coast. There is a wide range of people conflated in the German imaginary with black as a manifestation of the other. What they have in common is an Orientalist perception of a foreign threat, being strange and exotic. The differences among the puppets essentially come down to hats and the rest of the costume. Can we go on to the next slide? Puppets of the imagined African are again not African, but they are based on German encounters with Africa during the 19th century. The most notorious example is Casper Among the Savages by Frank Pocci. Casper, of course, is a traditional German puppet. In this case, he ends up on an island with black-faced puppets. They are dressed in grass skirts, they speak Germanic gibberish, and they want to eat Casper. Casper's role is interestingly ambiguous here. There are degrees of otherness that the plays depict. Casper is traditionally depicted as an outsider, but in this case, he represents white Germans and therefore is considered superior to the imagined Africans, who are the ultimate other. So this colonialist Casper fulfills a kind of civilizing function, with the play making the case for German colonization. Next slide, please. Another example of the imagined African shows changes in the depiction of race during the 20th century. Max Jacob, who is a famous puppeteer with the Hohensteiner Handpuppenspieler, used a puppet with a racist name associated with people of African descent from the 1920s till about 1960. It's one of 4 puppets that are clearly emblematic of the other. It's not clear where they're from, but they're clearly foreign. They speak German badly, they wear grass skirts, stereotypical racist features. They are meant to be laughed at. They're the butt of humor. Jacob had good relations with Nazi officials and was able to keep performing during World War II. During that time, Jean-Luc Temporal, who is French, was forced into labor by the Germans and was assigned to the Hohensteiner. After the war, Temporal created his own puppets in France. He adopted Jacob's puppet into his own character named Samba. Samba is related to the Seppel character from the Casper tradition. He's a sympathetic character for children to relate to, and certainly not the butt of humor. His costume has been described as a normal for a boy who comes from a former French colony and now lives in France. The features then, as you can see on the right side, are not as grotesquely exaggerated, and racism here takes the form of exoticism. Next slide, please. Puppets from the imagined African American were popular in the late 19th century. They depicted singers, dancers, and sports figures, especially following tours by African Americans. In Munich, there are examples of Josephine Baker, Louis Armstrong, and boxers who might be American. The Kolk 17 Museum in Lubeck has multiple examples of this. Here we see puppets depicting Dora Dean and Charles E. Johnson, who were famous vaudeville performers who toured Europe in the early 20th century. The original puppets used heads that were made for white puppets, but with the skin blackened. The puppet representing the male character was lost, so the Schichtels created a new puppet based on racist features. What's interesting is that in the case of the male puppet, there are two forms of blackface. In the first case, we have a white puppet that has literally been blackened. In the second case, grotesque stereotypes are employed. Next slide, please. Many puppets use race associations of laughter and music with African Americans. In Lubeck, there's a puppet from about 1923 that shows the intersection of these themes. It's a racist parody of African Americans. Actually, I'm sorry, I neglected to include this slide here. Sorry, we're missing a picture. So you have to imagine a puppet that it's a racist parody of African Americans in the 19th century with top hat and white gloves, but also a grass skirt and a spear. The description of it says the puppet laughs terribly, shakes himself in dance movements to jazz music, and makes bubbling sound accompanied by the song Tiger Rag. Adding to the sense of exoticism, he dances with an ostrich puppet. So this is a complex puppet evoking many racist stereotypes: the exotic African other, the blackface minstrel, and associations of African Americans with music and dance. Now to this slide. This is Love Idol in Cairo. A man and woman who laugh and with their lips moving. Both puppets display racist images with black face, thick red lips, and prominent white teeth. According to Rebane, the main reason for using these black puppets was purely technical, so the audience could see the movements of the lips with the contrast of the red, black, and white. But of course, another way of looking at it would be what you have are white spectators looking at black bodies. And these puppets employ the racist stereotypes of facial features and the fallacy of so-called natural abilities, in this case, music and humor. Next slide, please. The final example of there was my slide, and I had them mixed up. There was the slide of the fairy tale in Africa with the man in the grass skirt and the ostrich. So let's go on to the next one then. More recent example is from the great German puppeteer Albrecht Rosser, who created puppets of two female belly dancers, one black and one white, that he performed with in the 1960s and 1970s. These puppets have nearly naked bodies with an emphasis on their breasts and their buttocks. For Rosser, he felt these puppets were not a problem. His focus was on the technical wizardry. But the problem is not only in regard to race, but also gender, especially with how Rosser used them. He would stand with his hands in his pockets, swaying back and forth, causing the puppet to undulate in front of him. So what the audience saw was a white man casually ogling a nearly black body as it danced for him. Next, please. The last theme I want to talk about is the imagined multicultural German. And I'm using the word multicultural here with full awareness of its problems. These appeared in Germany after World War II in the context of NATO and the Cold War. They still employ racist stereotypes, but try to present what the creators might have considered positive images of race, or what Framenau in Berlin refers to as friendly or everyday racism. This first example shows the transformation of Jimmy performed by the great puppeteer Walter Büttner. Büttner performed in the glove puppet tradition beginning around 1929, but the Nazis prohibited him from performing in the 30s because of his association with the communists. He was drafted in the military, captured by the Americans, and ended up in a POW camp in Alabama, where it's said that he encountered African Americans. After his return to Germany, he resumed performing and developed the character Jimmy, which is a blackface puppet based on Seppel, again, Casper's sidekick. Jimmy is clumsy, makes mistakes, is childlike, speaks German badly, and is suggestive of a foreigner. But given that Jimmy is kind, well-meaning, and sympathetic, it's entirely possible that Büttner did not consider himself or the puppet to be racist. The early depiction of Jimmy from 1950 clearly relies on racist stereotypes, and by 1970s was clearly considered to be racist. In 1980, he had another version of Jimmy made in which the features are not as exaggerated, and he performed with this until 1990 on his death, when it was still, however, considered to be a problem. Next slide, please. East Germany also had puppets of the imagined multicultural German. The Assassination in Space, performed in Karl Marxstadt, Chemnitz in 1960, with a blackface puppet also named Jimmy. He's presented as a good person, a technician who wears working class clothing, but also as a victim of the capitalist system. So on the one hand, you have a blackface puppet who is presented in a seemingly positive light, but he's also in a subservient position and presented as a victim. Next slide, please. The most famous example of the imagined multicultural German is Jim Knopf, based on the children's novel Jim Button and Luke the Engine Driver from 1960. It was adapted into film and television and widely watched by German children. Jim has black skin, but there are no overt references to African descent. And race was not directly addressed, to the point that when I mentioned to a German friend who grew up watching Jim Knopf, she was surprised that I was including him in this study. She said, "I didn't even realize he's Black." Many did not consider the show to be racist in the 1960s and 70s, but it has been controversial since the late 20th century. And the question of racism in Jim Knopf is an active subject of debate in Germany now. For example, in 2013 is a popular German game show called Wetten das, Bet That. And in 2013, 200 people, including the mayor of Augsburg and his wife on a bet, showed up as Jim Knopf in blackface. So to conclude, and you can get rid of the PowerPoint here if possible, however these puppets are exhibited in German museums, these issues are important because the offensive puppets may alienate or even harm visitors. And puppets continue to operate as engines of racism. Also, one might speak of an obligation to history as a reason to display these puppets or use racist labels. But that raises other questions. What other obligations does one have? And why is one showing these particular puppets as opposed to others? And if one does show them, what is the context? What story is one telling? The value of a special exhibit, such as at Ballard now, is that it neither hides nor normalizes these puppets. Instead, it puts a spotlight on them, their history and their contexts. Puppets are never neutral. They will always raise issues and tell stories, and visitors will get some lesson. So the issue is not suppressing or censoring. The puppets are always going to be available for scholars. And research is essential, establishing a clear record of the puppet's provenance about what is known and what is not known. Curators then have the choice not to show offensive material or to omit descriptors that may be offensive or inaccurate, and to address controversial issues directly. For example, one can refer to the existence of an original title without using it and make clear the name was excluded and why. So these puppets can be displayed when and where appropriate, in the right context, in the right way, and at the right time. Museums can then be intentional about what visitors take away from the exhibit. Throughout, I would argue the prevailing values need to be sensitivity, honesty, and transparency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And then we'll go to Dr. Schroeder Cherry.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Dr. Song. Thank you, Dr. Condee. There is some overlap with our presentations, and my point of view is actually going to focus on how the team at Ballard took on the challenge of puppetry racial reckoning. This team actually did a very methodical approach to handling this exhibition. The exhibit itself raises important questions about displaying objects that are explicitly or implicitly racist. So one of the questions is it right to give such objects a place in a museum? The short answer to that is yes. Museums are communal spaces. They are designed for communication and discourse. When they function well, museums allow for exchange on difficult topics. I believe that any topic that can be articulated can be addressed in a museum when properly put into context. As Dr. Condee just mentioned, thinking about context, when looking at objects from the past, we are considering those objects often with contemporary perspective, using our contemporary eyes. The museum's responsibility is to put an item into context from its own period to help us understand it better. How was the item viewed in its own time? Sometimes an idea that was acceptable in the past is no longer acceptable in the present. Ethics change, social ideologies changes, but with the exhibit, the challenge is to determine how you contextualize it and how you understand that contextualization. I'm going to discuss how the team, which comprised Dr. Song, John Bell of Ballard, and Emily Wicks, also of Ballard, handled this challenge. Because the exhibit was so rich with objects from a number of different cultures representing different continents and different time periods, the number of ideas to approach was way too much to cover in one setting. The first challenge with this team was to come up with what I call the single big idea. They had approximately 50 puppets in this exhibition. What's the big idea for this one exhibition? What is it that you want to get across? After considerable discussion, the team decided that the big idea was this. Exhibiting puppets from the past and present provides opportunities to learn from past misrepresentations, consider the extent to which such negative images remain in circulation, contribute to the fight against systemic racism, and discuss possibilities for a more inclusive future. So that's the big idea. Once they had the big idea, they had to determine what are the pieces, what is it in this exhibition that you want to get across to your audience? And we decided that we needed, let's say, 4 main themes, because too many themes is not going to work in an exhibition. If you have too many themes, the visitors are just not going to come away remembering much from their visit. So the 4 themes that they came up with are representing difference, stereotyping, misunderstanding other cultures, complexity, and contemporary responses. That allowed us to go and do a deep dive into each one of those sections. So under representing difference, stereotyping, we decided that stereotyping reduces people to simple, essential characteristics fixed by nature. The false ideas that certain groups of people are born to be lazy, villainous, primitive, etc., are perpetuated with exaggerated facial and bodily features represented in popular culture, including puppetry, and they can justify systemic racism. So I'm just going to ask Emily to bring up some slides. And without going into a deep explanation of the images, I just want the viewers to have a sense of what was on exhibit at the show. Dr. Song gave us background on specific puppets. I want you to get a sense of what was on view. So this is the main gallery, the opening gallery in that space. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I'm going to stop here. The second theme was misunderstanding other cultures. And in discussing what that actually meant in context of this exhibition, they decided that the Orient or imagined East has long been represented in art and media as a land of fantasies with exotic sceneries, music and dance, and magical adventures. Some may think that this is a positive understanding of other cultures, but on the flip side, it keeps Asia in the past with no progression. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Stop here. The third theme was complexity. The discussion here is that there's a misunderstanding that racism is easily recognizable and perpetuated only by certain groups of people who identify as white supremacists. This exhibition demonstrates that understanding of race and practice of racism are continually shifting, found throughout society and deeply embedded in everyday lives. Next slide. 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 Stop. The fourth theme was contemporary responses. The discussion here is that this exhibit features contemporary artists whose works critique stereotypes and present alternatives. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Stop. So when addressing this exhibit, the museum staff decided that within these four big ideas, they would be able to move through the exhibit and focus on different puppets. And you can come up with the information without doing the same tour every time. You stuck with these themes and you moved around the exhibition. The team also decided it was important to have a glossary. We shouldn't assume that people are going to come into the gallery with the same understanding of specific words. And essentially they came up with a dozen words in the glossary. Of that dozen, I think there were 4 top words that were essential based on the exhibition's title itself and what was on display. For example, racial reckoning is part of the title. So what does that actually mean? If you were to ask someone off the street, what does racial reckoning mean? They probably would not come up with one succinct definition. So the team decided that it could be described as such. Racial reckoning is the series of actions, analyses, and attitudes about the history of racism in the United States, especially spurred by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others in 2020. Another word that I think it's important to be clear about in this exhibition is race. The team decided to use this definition: a social construct, a human-invented classification system invented as a way to define physical differences between people, but more often used as a tool for oppression and violence. Third word that I think is important: prejudice. Racism, defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or is marginalized. The fourth word that I think is essential for groups to understand in context of this exhibition is stereotypes. The group decided to define that as generalizations about the personal attributes of characteristics of a group of people. The other words in the glossary include minstrelsy, norm, orientalism, caricature, difference, and ethnic identifiers. The understanding is that if you have a set group of words and an understanding on how they're used in the exhibition, you can have a dialogue. What the team is experiencing now, however, on the floor is that even after using the glossary, many people who are, some of the visitors still don't quite understand the context. So the museum staff is spending a good deal of time talking about terminology and also raising the comfort level for discussion. Race tends to be a hot item in our country. It's a difficult conversation for many people. But going back to the idea of museums being a safe harbor for conversation, for open discussion, this is where Ballard is actually doing a great job in terms of allowing that to happen. Next slide. Pause. I wanted to end my segment by sharing some works that I actually do. I am a puppeteer. My puppets tend to be from the African diaspora. They are often criticized visually for being exaggerated or not fitting what I call a Disney-esque aesthetic. So without commentary, I will share my puppets with you. Dallas Dan. Next. DeAndre. Next. DeAndre in performance. Cordell. Farmer Cook. Darkan Lovely. She insists on being called Darkan Lovely. Ms. Lily is a puppet docent. Maya Opinion. And Newsy Nate of Puppet TV. And finally, Smooth Earl. I'm hoping that by sharing some images of my own work, we can spark a conversation after this presentation, and I look forward to talking to you guys about the exhibit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Schroeder. And yes, I think we all need to come back. Like we are all coming back, like John, Schroeder, and Bill.
Yes.
And, you know, we are waiting for. Hi. So, yes. Thank you very much for your presentations, and then like yeah, kind of Schroeder's presentation kind of made me think how much we what kind of reminding me of the conversations we have with our visitors and then student groups in the museum, and then somehow it had the kind of unexpected moments as well as very much expected moments. So what I actually want to start with, yes, I would like to ask our audience to put, please post your questions on the chat wherever you are. If you are on Zoom with us, then please Zoom put your questions or any comments on the Zoom and chat. And if we are on Facebook with us, then please post your questions and comments on your Facebook chat box. And then as Dr. Cherry could introduce, the main objective of this exhibition probably is to spark the conversation. So we want to talk about it. So please send us your question and comment. We'll really appreciate that. So if we go back to, it's also the question, as already Dr. Cherry answered the yes, but the question is what to do, and also the question also that the Condee posed with what to do about them, and then what to do with them, I think. Then why are we kind of showing this? So that was the question also we've been asked, why you display them, and then even some kind of confused, why did you even make them? That was the question we got. So yeah, and then kind of thinking about it, and then sometimes I finding it difficult to engage some people with this, that I mean, I had this strong belief that people need to know about this, because it is impacting people, it has impact on people's mind in understanding about this group of people. But and then we need to unpick that on the misunderstandings. But and then we need to, as a museum, that we need to kind of disseminate the knowledge. There was that I strongly believe in them. And then there is a moment I have to say that, why is it necessary, or yeah, because I don't feel that sometimes you feel that hit that wall that, you know, okay, yes, I don't know, like what. So
I see a question here. Someone's asking, do you consider eliminating a figure from an exhibit because it might be considered offensive as a form of self-censorship?
I think that's from Steve Wiederman from Chicago, who's a great puppeteer and musician. I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it gets to something that's very prominent in the discussions across the country about representation and harm, I think, which Bill alluded to in the beginning of his presentation. Steve's question makes me think of something Dr. Paulette Richards shared with us earlier on in our discussions about the exhibition, and an exhibition that she was considering or planning to curate. She was thinking about the kind of puppets that we included in our exhibition, the jig dolls, these sort of the most racist puppets that we have on display, and we have like 5 of them on display. And she was saying, she was thinking about displaying such puppets in an exhibition in Atlanta, where a lot of the museum visitors would be young Black kids. And her question was, how many of these things can a Black child see before feeling a lot of stress or emotional labor, I think is the term she used. And I think that kind of response is something that personally I hadn't thought so much about. And when Paulette mentioned it, it made sense to me, you know, thinking about the relationships that people have with objects and how they respond to them. And I think her thought was like, there's maybe some of these images could be seen by, you know, like young kids, for example, without too much emotional harm, but a lot of racist images might not be a good idea. So Stephen talks about that as self-censorship, which is one way to look at it. I think like it's also sort of a curatorial decision, that the kind of curatorial decision that people are always making, you know, like when we had an exhibition about living objects, African-American puppetry, there was a presentation about Mamulengo performance in Brazil and its roots in African performance. And some of the puppets that our colleagues showed were photographs of sort of mechanical puppets of two or more people fornicating, having sex. And I think, you know, if we decided not to include such puppets, which I think we would think seriously about that. We have a lot of kids who come to our museum. I think I wouldn't consider that necessarily self-censorship, rather than a form of curatorial decision. Maybe we don't want to show pornographic puppets to kids. So I think I understand Stephen talking about these wider issues of seeing this as censorship, or
Well, when you're making curatorial decisions, you have to find a balance. What's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And when you, for example, when you were describing this, you used the word fornication and having sex. Do we allow kids to see sexual acts in a museum? Normally, do we do that ever? So you would weigh that against what it is that you want to present in the gallery. And I think there is such a thing as visual trauma. If you're overloading too negatively on something, then it's out of balance. You have to find your balance.
I can think of a comparable example with this. When I was in Germany, I would ask the curators there, are there puppets that you would not display at all? And almost all of them, without my prompting, brought up the subject of puppets trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes. And they said, given our history in Germany, we're not going to show those puppets. Given the history of Nazis and the Holocaust. To me, that's not an issue of censorship. That is a matter of acknowledging their own history and the dangers that they would have in continuing to perpetuate those stereotypes. And I come back to the issue of the puppets are gonna be there in the collections, and other curators can make decisions as to which ones should be displayed and how they should be displayed. And it comes back to me a question of what story are you telling? The themes that Dr. Cherry spoke about. What story are you telling, and what puppets are going to help tell that story? And yes, those are a lot of difficult choices.
So, I mean, yes. So what my experience is that, yeah, and then when we were getting ready and then selecting object for the exhibition, there was concern about. I heard also I understood the concern about emotional labor. And now after it is on, and then having conversation with the visitors, actually we had the visitors also had reported that being having emotional difficulty looking at the object, but I see so many cases actually the visitors cannot read the code, the racist code in the object. That's also what we saw. Then it's the emotional that impact or harm can only be done in a way that actually they are able to read the object, what they actually mean. So that's also the kind of case so surprisingly, actually, there are, as Dr. Cherry kind of explained about why we put on glossaries, that we actually learned that actually these codes are no longer legible as racist tropes. That actually is a kind of experience today and then past weeks with the students. And then the other thing is that it's not really about eliminating the object. It's about showing them in right context. At this moment, I feel is that how we and why we show them. It's now we are not putting the minstrelsy object. I mean, there are other cases that actually minstrel puppets were used in actual shows and then have a different costume on them and then have playing different roles that I experienced. But in our museum context, they will be shown if they come back out, and then they will be shown in different contexts. And then kind of something I recently think about is how we're going to do Ballard puppets from now on. Also, that how we are going to we might be able to show those puppets in different contexts. So then how are we going to address the issue we are addressing in when they were shown in other contexts? Where, yeah, that's something kind of, I don't know, we don't have any year plan to show them again, but I'm thinking about, yeah, they are now in the context of Orientalism, but they can come back in other contexts, I feel. But then how we do it, then kind of thinking about that.
That actually answers a question I see from AC11. A second part of his question is, are all puppets to be looked upon as children's domain?
No, I would say no, of course not. And I think, you know, part of what we've been doing at the Ballard Institute is to constantly work against that venerable trope or cliche. So of course that's not the case, certainly from our perspective. It's interesting, AC11 says, but taken in the context of the times, are they to be eliminated? And I think this to me resonates with discussions I have in my brass band about music by Black composers from New Orleans, and what's white folks' responsibility for playing Black music, or like stories, couple today about statues of Confederate heroes being taken down in the South. Those statues appear in places that historically had a lot of lynchings, it turns out. So, you know, the question is sort of turns on the question of censorship, and are you trying to eliminate history? And I think we're not eliminating it, but certainly trying to understand it, like Min's saying, and to understand how these things functioned, you know, to reinforce racism, I think. Thinking of Min's comment about context, the Jim Crow Museum in Indiana is an amazing place, good online presence, the Jim Crow Museum, and they present from their collections racist memorabilia, and it's right there. But the whole purpose of the museum is to explain, to teach, to help people understand how it happened that racist memorabilia and anti-Black racism, how that became such a important part of American popular culture. And then in that case, like, yeah, they're showing all of that.
But what they're not doing is saying we want to continue this, and that's what the audience understands. The audience understands that's a capsule in time, and we're looking back at that time. We also understand that we don't endorse it now,
right?
And that's where we keep coming back to this concept of contextualization. It's always contextualization. It's always putting it in the understanding of what does it mean now, as opposed to what did it mean then? And has our perspective changed?
I have a question for the group about one of your themes of stereotyping. One of the explanations that I would often hear in Germany about these puppets was that, yes, they are traffic in stereotypes, but puppetry always uses stereotypes. Puppetry is dependent on stereotypes. And it got me to thinking about the issue of exaggeration versus stereotypes. And is there a difference between exaggeration and stereotypes? And does puppetry necessarily have to always engage? Is this true that puppetry is always trafficking in these stereotypes, and therefore these just happen to be these racist stereotypes? So I'm just curious about this question, what y'all think about this.
I actually see one of my friends online who's in theater, Clinton Davis, and I'm pretty sure he could respond to this. But dealing with stereotypes and imagery, there's also a fine line between what's theatrical. If you're performing in a setting, you have to make sure that your features are strong enough to be able to be viewed from a distance. That's one example. Mm-hmm. Stereotyping, however, is, as the group determined, it's a generalization of a group of people. So that's the stereotype. An exaggeration can just be an elongated nose, but you're not saying that one group of people, all of them have the elongated nose.
Right.
The same thing.
Yeah.
And if I could jump in, looking at in my class today, pictures of puppets from Mali, Bamana puppets from Mali, you realize the major traditions of puppetry always involved exaggerated features. I appreciate what Schroeder said about things that how they need to read from a distance, and it sort of seems essential. But I also agree with what Schroeder's saying. I think there's ways to do that, to exaggerate, and non-realism actually. Like I don't think the solution is that only realistic puppets should be used, because that, to my mind, that flies against thousands of years of history.
Yeah, and African puppetry, West African puppetry is a great example of that, because they use wild colors, and it's an extension of their sculptural traditions. So you're going to see women with large breasts. They're celebrating that. Actually, we might see it differently, but they're using this and they're celebrating it as a body form.
I think the exaggeration is necessary. And I think when we're faced with this situation, sometimes we feel like, okay, not gonna go anywhere near stereotyping, and or we're not gonna play in music, not gonna play any music by Black composers or something. And you want to step back and totally avoid the complexities and the danger that you might do the wrong thing. But in fact, I think it is possible. When we were, Schroeder probably remembers when we were putting together our African American exhibit, this question came up, which is Stephen Wiederman's question: how can we portray people of race without being accused of racism? Which is like a great fear that we have, or maybe white folks particularly. It seems that someone is always offended. And I think in that discussion we had, it was what came up was if a white puppeteer is performing a Black puppet with respect, like that was this tricky issue with respect, then that could be okay. Was what we were just chatting about, conversing about. Like it could be possible for a white person or a person of one ethnicity to perform a puppet of a different ethnicity, which is fundamental to puppetry and puppetry history around the world, if it was done with respect. I thought that was a very interesting perspective. And how do you define respect? That's a different thing.
Yes, I mean, like stereotype is in a way reduction, and then exaggeration is a form of expression. So, and then what puppetry, I mean, as to be a kind of the economics of the expression, that that puppet needs to be recognizable as that character. That's why they puppet, like, for example, so this is Asian puppet, and then you use that people of that time at that place understand that it's Asian, needs to be represented in the puppet to communicate this character as Asian. That's I think that's how it works. And then one kind of interesting like aspect puppet we have in the exhibition is like this Aladdin set of Aladdin, where so the characters are kind of in representation of imagined the Orient. And then there's a princess who is blonde and blue-eyed. So princess, to be understood as a princess, she cannot be like Asian, because the prince, to understood this female character, the princess, it needs to be blonde and blue-eyed. Blue eyes. So that's that expression. I found that really fascinating. It's actually, I don't know if that is well, we don't want to be like a representation of Orient, but pick this specific character and then represented in white is also kind of it's not straightforward, but that is It's interesting thing I kind of came across while kind of looking at the puppets for this exhibition. Yes. Yeah.
I thought Kathleen Lewis has an interesting question
Yes.
here. We might want to consider. I don't know the answer. How do you find the room and attention to provide the proper context for examples of racist objects when you are not limited to a single genre? Do you devote yourself to a narrow and more granular subject matter? I'm not sure I understand that question completely. I don't know if others do. I don't know if does it refer to like our exhibition has examples of representations of Orientalism and minstrelsy and sort of Asian representations of others?
Yeah, in fact, I thought that the impact that I thought that there is interest. That is kind of one interesting aspect is you rarely see in other exhibitions or discussions that talks about racism, because we talk about racism not in one. So we have racism against Asian Americans as well as Asians, and then with the African Americans. I often find that these were discussed in separate places with the separate people, and then we also talk about racism in Asia also. Unfortunately, we don't talk about it and then we see the context, the racism in more. I really try to see the racism in context of a global issue rather than that is kind of limited to US. There's a tendency to talk about it like an issue in the US, but I mean, one thing I wanted to do this exhibition, but I couldn't because I couldn't find the puppets. But you know, there are the places in this world now ethnic cleansing is going on. And then we couldn't kind of talk, there was, that didn't kind of have that together with what we are doing was, I mean, there was a kind of talking of, so
if you recall,
yeah.
one of the team's biggest challenges was what big idea, and then what are the 4 main points. So to get to that question, you do have to pick and choose what you're going to focus on. You can't cover everything.
Yes, Schroeder told me so many times.
So granular, but you do have to decide where your focus is going.
But I find that it's really valuable point about this exhibition is that it's important to, it's just not this racism against the minstrelsy tradition and the yellow peril stereotype are not separate issue. They operate in similar way, and then there are a lot of people who experience violence and injustice because of the circulation of the stereotypes. So I feel really strongly about that. That is one point we have in that exhibition. I really rarely see it in other places.
Mm-hmm.
In Germany, the many of the exhibits that are still on display were designed in the permanent exhibitions in the 80s and 90s and so forth. And the attitude then apparently was, these puppets are racist. It's obvious that they are racist. We don't need to explain the racism. We don't need to display. Of course, audiences will understand that that's racist. Well, of course, Schroeder's response is exactly right. It's laughable, especially when you understand. But so they're struggling now with how do you do that? How do you provide that context? And still there is a strong strain who says, or people who say it's racist. Let the audience make up their own mind. And from my opinion, that's a problem. But in other cases, they're thinking about things like putting racist puppets in a room in which you might have to read something before you enter the room. So there's some context is provided initially, and then you see the puppets, and so you aren't seeing them absent of that. Or, you know, the ability to use smartphones and have commentary. So it's not just reading, but have information that's provided on smartphones as other ways of getting that contextual information across. But they're struggling with this, absolutely.
I think whenever you're exhibiting puppets, or art in general, you're putting something out there. Thinking of what you were saying, Bill, about sort of warning texts or things that you have to read, like you're putting something out there and you have no idea how people will respond despite your efforts. Like we have these racist jig puppets, and right next to it, sort of anti or racist work by Garland Farwell, who's a brilliant African-American artist in Alabama, I want to say, who draws on African-American folk culture. But sometimes people will see his puppets, which we have on display because we think they're representing a response to racist representations, and people think they're just another example of the racist puppet. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
I think we tried to counter the images we found problematic in a way, or puzzling.
Can I ask Emily to bring up my slide number 22, because that's exactly what you're talking about. Number 22 is Hallwell's piece.
Yeah, so
number 23. Yeah. This is what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. And when you know who made the puppets, it's Garland Farwell, who's this amazing performer and artist, then it's very clear in my mind what he's doing, but not for everybody.
And that makes me think about something I think it was Min was saying earlier, and if it wasn't, please forgive me, about ability of contemporary audiences to read racist coding. And that doesn't, even if they can't read the racist coding, if it's in a sense illegible, doesn't mean that it still isn't racist and still isn't perpetuating racist stereotypes. But some people might not understand the history, for example, of exaggerated thick lips or exaggerated lips and so on and so forth. All those tropes that go back to minstrelsy. And so there does seem to me to be a need somehow to kind of to teach racist literacy, then without perpetuating it, and that becomes the problem.
Right.
Yeah, but what we and then also we were advised from Dr. Cherry was that, I mean, we are not there to test their cultural literacy. I mean, we need what I experience is that if we didn't have them out in the space, then it's just we probably didn't know. People didn't know. People don't know. And then it is really it's a valuable conversation we can have about, I mean, about the racism with the people who didn't know the coding. They didn't know the code, or they cannot read the symbolism or kind of history without knowing the history. That's why it is important. Otherwise, it's just going under the surface. And then it will live on that way. And then I think I really didn't expect that kind of reaction, because somehow a lot of people, what I was told that there were a lot more concern about offending people, but there was not much concern about actually people don't know the racist tropes. So, but what I realized, actually, we see latter cases more in the exhibition, and that's how I kind of. I mean, I don't know if it is happening in other places in the U.S. It might be different, but that's how I experience in the place where we are at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question by AC11 who says, how do you feel about the WPA puppets, Works Progress Administration puppets, in the collection at George Mason University? their depiction of African Americans in their minstrel performances, a good cause, the WPA, government-sponsored theater across the country during the Depression, but a questionable usage.
Oh, I don't know about this example. Do any?
But again, I haven't seen the installation, I've seen photographs, but again, it's about context. You talk about WPA and then you talk about what puppets look like in that period. That's all it is.
Right. And there were some.
Yeah, they're not perpetuating something. They're actually, that's another example of a capsule in time.
Some of the WPA marionettes were from the Buffalo Marionette Unit, which was largely African-American puppeteers doing stories about, there was like a biography of Stephen Foster, who famously wrote minstrel songs, and a biography of Abraham Lincoln, I think. And maybe they did, maybe the Buffalo Marionette Unit did minstrel shows. I'm not sure about that, but like the good side of that is this was a moment when, you know, Black puppeteers in upstate New York, or Black artists, were being trained to become puppeteers, and there was this very interesting work that they were doing that should be noted. And the minstrelsy is, that's really it's not complicated in one way, but it's very complicated in another way.
Yeah.
I really appreciate again and again, Schroeder, your sense, you know, well, WPA was good, and there's one part of it that was, in my mind, reflecting mainstream attitudes about race in the 1930s.
And those puppeteers were using the styles of puppetry that were appropriate at that time. They were following a primarily European model of marionettes.
We are at sort of the end of our program. It's 8:31. So I don't know if people might have final brilliant thoughts that they would like to add at this point.
I would end by saying Ballard did an incredible job. Your team did a great job in terms of tackling this exhibition and also broadening the conversation about stereotypes, racial ethnicity, and identity. So bravo to you.
We benefited from your advice too.
I agree with Schroeder on this, and I think that this exhibit that Ballard is doing is great, and there really is a kind of there is a racial reckoning that's happening right now in the world of puppetry. The place that I've seen this happening most in Germany is the Kolk 17 Museum in Lübeck. They've had a number of seminars just like this, and exhibitions devoted to issues of racism and colonialism in puppetry. So I think this is the kind of thing that needs to continue.
Yes, as we mentioned earlier, the representation is in the core of puppetry. So this is probably like, I mean, it's just mentioned, it's a big problem in animation and issue, not problem, maybe issue and talking point or animation, and then also cartoons and many other disciplines and genres in art and popular culture. Also, it is really important conversation to have in puppetry as a field.
So, thank you, Min, for putting this discussion together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Schroeder. Thanks, Bill. Thanks to everybody watching. These discussions are always challenging, but I feel like, I don't know if we're getting somewhere, but it always seems like worth it to try to move ahead with these challenging issues. I wanted to invite everyone, if you're in the Northeast, come see Puppetry's Racial Reckoning, curated by Jungmin Song. It's open through the end of October, so 2 more weeks. And then please feel free to look at our online offerings. My colleague Emily Wicks posted a link to where you can sign up for our email list, and we have information on our social media pages. The next Puppet Forum will be Thursday, November 4th at 7 p.m. The Doll Plays reunion, again with Min moderating. I think Min's moderating that one. And Alva Rogers, Heather Henson, and Holly Laws. So I want to give special thanks to our colleague at the Ballard Institute, Emily Wicks, who's making everything happen, not just here, but in other realms. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thank
You.
you.